You'll be aware of the whole fleet issue. There have been a lot of problems with that. Spain is very divided. There have been many issues. The Vuelta a España, sporting events where they have been sabotaged with the idea that Palestine are the good guys, that Israel are the bad guys, that they're massacring, that they're sacrificing all the members of Palestine, Palestinians, constantly. Women and children, they paint us as the devil, but that's not true. If we look at history, which many Spaniards, including myself, are quite ignorant of. So who better than you to explain to us why there is this conflict between Israel and Palestine? And to what extent is everything the media is telling us true and what isn't? Because the whole Flotilla thing has been exaggerated here in Spain, really exaggerated, with Bobby, Gaza and company.
I think that's the first confusion, thinking that this is a conflict between Israel and something called Palestine. The conflict stems from the Israeli sector and the extremist group Hamas. They have support from most of their population, according to all surveys, including health surveys. So it can be said that Hamas does represent much of the desire of what we call the Palestinian population. I believe there is no distinct Palestinian people. Instead, they are clans or tribes, as the Arab world has always operated through tribes. Only in the 20th century, due to English and French colonialism, were artificial countries created. After the Sykes-Picot Treaty, countries such as Syria were formed. That is, these two powers got together and took the map of the Middle East and said, well, France wants the oil routes, I want these oil wells. So let's make a country that I'm going to call Iraq, and you take this one that's going to be called Syria. And they started inventing countries. One of those places they invented was what they called the British Mandate over Palestine. Not because there's a country called Palestine, but because it was called that geographically since Roman times. What happened? The creation of the state of Israel was very hard on the Arab psyche over time. Because in the mentality of Islam, the Jews, also the Christians, and all those who are not in Islam, they cannot have, let's say, self-determination in the lands of Islam. Since at that time, the Muslims had controlled that land for a few centuries, about 5 centuries under the Ottoman Empire, and suddenly, we Jews liberated our land. In fact, this land was called Judea before it was called Palestine. The Jews returned to our land after the Great. This caused a short circuit in the Muslim world's mentality. How is it possible that the Jews, whom in the Islamic mentality we treated very badly, are now redeemed? It can't be. Islam can't lose to the idea of the Hebrew Bible, which also includes the Old Testament. It can't be. So they started to create narratives to try to undermine Israel. And one of those narratives is the creation of a people called Palestinians. They simply gathered their tribes and told them, from now on, you are Palestinians. It's a nationality that started in the 60s, in the mid-60s. Now, this war specifically, the Gaza Strip issue. Just so people understand, the terrorist organization Hamas, which are Islamic radicals, has been like the Islamic State through even worse crises. Because what we saw on October 7th, they didn't lose a country. That's one of many mistakes made in the West. That when you see at the Vuelta de Bilbao that people go to tackle cyclists and they go with the Palestinian flag. That's not the Hamas flag. It's a Fatah flag that has nothing to do with it. They're mixing up a lot of ideas because they think the Palestinians want a country. And the truth is that Hamas doesn't want a country. Nowhere in all their founding documents and their charter do they ask for a country. What do they ask for? The destruction of Israel and then yours, those of you who are watching. They ask for the destruction of the West. So what happens is that Gaza was an area that was ruled by Egypt for many years. And a side note here. The Palestinians in Gaza never demanded a country or claimed Egypt was occupying them during the decades under Egyptian rule. Why? Because the problem isn't their self-determination. The problem began when Israel, after centuries of war with Egypt, took the Gaza Strip, prompting Gaza to seek its liberation. In other words, the problem has always been the Jewish presence. In 2005, Israel gave Gaza to these people called the Gazans, to this group of people. And it was expected because that was the narrative they sold us in the West for a long time. They told us, if you want peace, the Israelis have to give territory to the Islamic radicals. And that's the perfect recipe for peace. If you give them territory, they'll have their Palestinian country. Israel followed poor advice and gave them the Gaza Strip in 2005. And the consequence of that was not the creation of a utopian Palestinian country, like a dependent Monaco, right? What was created was an Afghanistan, Hamas in Gaza, and that's the war that exploded in our faces on October 7th. When they simply crossed the border over the course of a few hours and carried out the worst terrorist attack documented in the 21st century.
Roughly how many people died? Do you know the number?
Yes, about 1,200 Israeli people in one day. And to give you some perspective, in Spain, the conflict with Euskadi Askatasuna from the 1960s until its dissolution, they died over the decades. There were about 830 people, something like that. Over those decades, Hamas killed 1,200 people in one day. And that's why I would like to know the opinion of a Spaniard if he has his feet on the ground. What should the Spanish government do? If a group came in, I'm not sure whether to call it Euskadita Askatasuna or another radical group, to kidnap 300 or about 1,200 people, by the way. Israel, we are much smaller by comparison. If we talked about proportion, they would massacre tens of thousands and kidnap thousands. What should Spain do in a case like that? Well, what Pedro Sanchez did was come to Israel and say, when our victims were still smoking because they were incinerated by Hamas, he called Israel Nazis, compared them to Nazis, right? At the end of that month, he imposed an arms embargo on Israel, preventing it from defending itself against Hamas. War broke out with Lebanon and Yemen, involving 7 fronts and 8 tanks. Thanks to Hashem, who gave us strength, to God, who gives us strength, we overcame all those fronts. There are no more fronts where we are fighting hard. But Pedro Sanchez deliberately tried to tie Israel's hands, which I see as political inconsistency. I get that he acts for his own survival, given all his cases. However, Spain's politics is a different matter. But it fits a lot with the reaction that Israel must have had, which has been heavily criticized. But really, what else could we have done except defend our family?
What happened for that to occur? I mean, why was that able to happen? How were they able to jump that fence and get in so blatantly? What really failed? That's the question. If anything failed at all, maybe nothing failed, and it was just a coincidence.
No, yes, this is still under investigation, and surely after a couple of years it will have been sorted out. And we would know if some people will even have to face penalties for this. They should go to jail for this due to negligence. It's surprising, as you say, how can a country with intelligence services... It's impressive. There are even rumors, wink, wink, that Pedro Sanchez's phone is tapped, you know? Do you stick your hands?
Tell me everything.
So how is it possible that this country, well, everything, they couldn't foresee that all this attack was going to happen? The truth is, they did know the facts. And the problem wasn't the lack of security or the lack of information, but rather the interpretation of the information. Because you can have all the facts. For example, the thousands of SIM cards were activated that very morning. That is, many signs that pointed to something about to happen. How come the security system like EJERS and all that wasn't triggered? The reason is interpretation. For many years, it was thought that if Hamas, or in general radical Islam, if you keep them in a good economic status, keep them sufficiently satisfied, they won't attack you. Because they believe there's a correlation between having a good economy and not having war. But they didn't understand anything. In Islam, the economy doesn't matter, you know? For example, the Bin Laden family were billionaires. Osama bin Laden wanted to attack everything important. It's his Islamic cause against the West, the great Satan, fueling this anti-Western narrative. Because there is no correlation between being in a good economic status and peace. In Islam, that doesn't exist. In fact, the rich, the millionaires of Hamas, are the leaders of Hamas, and they are the ones who pushed for the war. So it was a bad diagnosis of what the enemy was going to do. In parenthesis, during September 2023, and also the month before September 2023, there were many demonstrations by Gazans at the Israeli border due to international pressure. Aside from firing tear gas to try to push us back, nothing was done. So there was talk of demonstrations with 40,000 people. It was believed that they just came, protested, and left until it blew up in our faces. I mean, and that's something I also want to say to those watching us in the West. Thank you.
Why do you think so? You obviously know far more than I do about Israel's history and geopolitics. Why do you think Spain is so against Israel and in favor of Palestine? Apart from being a distraction, what advantage can Spain gain from confronting Israel? I imagine that if something happens to someone from the flotilla, like a Spaniard accidentally tripping and falling, anything that could later be manipulated and used to blame you, or if someone has a heart attack from nerves and tries to blame you, even though you did nothing. Yeah, you didn't give them medication, I don't know what else. Here they've even said, you know who Barbie, Gaza, and company are? That they were mistreated, beaten, vilified. Well, you did everything you could to them, and they don't have a mark and appear on every Spanish television show. You ask, but where are the bruises? They have no wounds or any marks. On the other hand, there are comparisons on social media with Palestinian hostages who were in Palestine, who are skin and bones, destroyed with wounds. You compare and ask, how can the average Spaniard be so obtuse, let's say, to think Israelis are the bad guys? What have you done wrong? Defend yourself? I don't understand what you've done wrong.
It doesn't make any sense. For example, the case you mentioned is literally just applying logic. Israel is in a diplomatic situation where if it makes a wrong move, that means condemnation, broken diplomacy, economy. I mean, it affects Israel. What logic do they see in Israel doing something against influencers that would actually damage Israel's image even more? It doesn't make any sense, but obviously they have to have a narrative. What makes me uncomfortable, I'll be honest with you, is that as Jews, we have a long history of myths about us. They say we poison wells, drink babies' blood, and have horns. Hello? But that's why I don't really care much about what they say about me. What bothers me is that these people take the side of Hamas, that they start to support more. For example, I felt uncomfortable when I saw an influencer in Spain say, well, beforehand, they posted a photo on social media writing their lawyers' numbers on their arms. I don't know if you saw that photo. When the Israeli army catches or kidnaps us, these are our lawyers' numbers, and they write them on their arms. For Jews, numbers on arms symbolize and recall the Holocaust. So it's as if they're mocking a kind of reflection, trying to take Jewish suffering and apply it to themselves. They have an influence on social media. The news said that their stay in Israel, the 2 days they were held by the, for having violated a maritime blockade during the war, they said it was an experience very Auschwitz. Yes.
Do you see it? Is it being compared?
I'm not sure people know about Auschwitz. Look it up online and watch documentaries. They killed thousands daily in gas chambers. Is that really such a bad comparison? So what I see is that it's about taking Israel's suffering and trying to appropriate it. Why? On a level, now putting on my rabbi hat, if that's the term, purpose. Because in wokeism, like in progressivism, since they no longer have ideas, they don't have a religion, they have a void. So they need to adopt a narrative. They feel that guilt. As they say, we're Spanish, and since Spain conquered another place 500 years ago, I shouldn't feel guilty because my ancestors were colonialists, or use that to justify fighting so-called colonialists like Israel. We are not colonialists. But then all that guilt they have, they're going to try to apply it to others. That is to say, they say, well, since we are the evil ones, we're going to try to take the suffering of others and take ownership of that suffering. It's like a klepto-history. So that's the phenomenon that happens with Barbie Gaza and all these people who obviously, besides that, brings in a lot of money. I think she's on a reality show now.
They want to put her on a reality show now. And has it been discovered that she had, before all this Flotilla thing happened, she had some ins or something like that? A type of luxury chalet in upscale vacation developments that no one understood how she could afford to maintain. She's a civil servant and her husband's a police officer. With their normal salaries, everything's uncertain. Where did she get the money? She's an influencer, but she wasn't a big one before. Now she is, with everything that's happened. Nobody really knew her. She wasn't a famous influencer. No, nobody knew her, just a handful of people who followed her, so to speak, and now she's very, very famous and all over the media. She's everywhere. She said on a show, since she's still on television, that it's really messed up, that her phone was stolen. Her phone number was leaked, and now everyone is calling her and so on. And the host said to her, wow, that's really bad. Have you reported it? And she said, Well, no, I haven't been able to because, of course, I haven't even been able to see my family. I just arrived after being kidnapped by Israel and have only been in television studios since, so I haven't had time to report it. But are we crazy? You come here after being mistreated by Israel, beaten, insulted, even having your phone number stolen and posted online. You don't report it to the police, you go to television studios instead? It's surreal, Jacobo, more than you can imagine in Spain. That's why I truly appreciate you being here tonight. You can't imagine how many people in Spain are convinced that you are the bad guys and that you are constantly killing women, children, bombing hospitals. What can we say about
that? That's exactly what I was saying. I don't know if you're a believer or if those watching are believers. The difference with this group of people is exactly that they don't have the truth. And that's why it's like, I wrote an article about this topic yesterday. It's like a new religion where they need it's the religion of victimhood. How does it work? Since those people really don't have a cause, their lives are very miserable. They need something besides clinging to some belief. The only thing that kept them going these 2 years was talking about their pain. Why? Because I don't know if any of you have ever been to a soccer match or to a stadium. When people wear the same jersey and chant the same cheer, it's a feeling that comes from being human, from ancient times, and it feels very deep. These people finally found a niche where they can shout genocide, genocide, whatever they make up, and at last they feel like they're part of a tribe. So it's very hard to break away. And the only way their ideology can continue is if the suffering of the Gazans continues. Because if there is suffering in Gaza, they have an excuse to go out and say, genocide, genocide. Thank you for that. Now that there's a ceasefire, they're on edge. How can there be a ceasefire? Their residency and narrative are over. So what happens is that if you always make the Gazan the victim, it doesn't matter if they're a terrorist group or not. The criticism, it has to be shielded from criticism. Even if they committed the worst massacre and attack of the 21st century in terms of documentation, no matter what they do, the Gazans cannot be criticized. They need Israel to remain the villain so they can keep opposing it and maintain their identity and flags. Free Palestine and similar slogans are why they keep pushing a narrative no matter the facts. You can show them there's no genocide since Gaza's population has grown. Israel provides humanitarian aid, creates corridors, and designates safe areas to protect civilians, etc. That Israel steals the humanitarian show from Hamas, etc. Imagine a genocidal person claiming that show for themselves. Imagine Hitler in World War II telling the Jews, well, Jews, rebuild your Jewish country. It's psychedelic. There's no way this could be a genocide. But for their narrative, so they can keep having their identity experience, they need Israel to always be the bad guy. Israel isn't the only antagonist, the Spaniard is too. People who have their identity well established, whether they're attached to Hispanic heritage or Catholicism or some solid identity, they become antagonists for this reason. They can't imagine any ideology but their own. That's exactly why we see that there are people who are separated from people like Pedro Sanchez, or specifically people who have solid values.
It has really caught my attention and it has worried me. I have many friends from different religions. And, well, I'm not a believer in a God as such. I respect all religions, including the different ones in my own family. I believe in the universe. Let's put it that way. That's the name I give to God. Let's say it like that. But I've been very concerned that in Spain, there is an Israeli population clinging to, I think it's religion. Correct me if I'm wrong and forgive my ignorance. Muslims, right? Jews? No, sorry, Jews. Israelis are Jews, right? Sorry if I'm mistaken.
In Israel, most Israelis are Jews, but about 20% are Arabs, and most of them are Muslims. This is interesting, since you might wonder, if someone wanted to commit genocide against Arabs, why not begin here instead of elsewhere? A fifth of the population are Arabs who are in the Israeli parliament. They are in education, they are in politics, they are in academia, in everything. So I think the narrative is processed. Yes, there are Muslims in Israel, but most are Jews.
So they were Jews. It's a video from Spain of a place. I'm not sure if it was a restaurant. Don't quote me, I can't remember. A home of Israelis, of Jews, and some Spanish women with weird hair and all that. They had painted genocidal and other things about Israelis who have lived in Spain for some time. They hadn't done anything. They had nothing to do with it. They were simply Jews and they were being targeted. Just like when Hitler was in charge. and the Israeli neighbor would come out who spoke perfect Spanish just like you. But we haven't done anything. Why are you painting us? No, but you don't know there's a genocide. But what fault do I have? And she told her she was going to burn her house down. The Spaniard, a girl of about 20 years old, telling her she was going to burn her house down. But how? The Israeli was filming her saying, I'll paint this tomorrow, showing how things are in Spain. People are so obtuse that since they're told there's a genocide, they attack Israelis living in Spain who are Jewish and have little or nothing to do with it. They haven't fired a bullet. For better or worse, they live in Madrid. How do you fight that, Yakov? Often in Spain, I'm unsure how to help people see the reality of things.
I don't know either. I don't have the slightest idea how that narrative can keep being sustained. In Spain, they've made graffiti saying synagogues. Was it synagogues? Of course, you can link it to Israel because, well, it's the country of the Jews, but a local Spanish entity, and they go and make graffiti, they go and do what you said. They point out products. For example, I don't know if you knew that in Spain, they had to create an app to see which products are made in Israel, to boycott them and not buy them. They go to the supermarket and scan. That's Nazism. Remember how Nazis marked Jews? They put a yellow star on us to know who was Jewish, and they discriminated against us. The yellow star is what you're talking about. They point out businesses and products. It's so serious that in Jerusalem, about a month ago, a little more, there was a terrorist attack where 12 Palestinian Arabs came out and started shooting people at a bus station. Innocent people. And among them was a Spanish citizen, Yakov Pinto. What do? Do you have blood? And in Spain, in Melilla, I think it was, they tried to hold a minute of silence for the victim because he was a Spanish citizen who had nothing to do with the army, nothing at all. During the minute of silence in Melilla, they brought out Palestinian flags and shouted, genocide, genocide, you know? It's so vicious. That's what it is, Judeophobia. I don't see any other explanation for this. And what also worries me to tell the public is that the Jew is often the canary in the coal mine. In mining, they use the canary to measure remaining oxygen. If the canary fell first, everyone would flee the mine, knowing they'd soon run out of oxygen. It usually happens that when the Jew is attacked, who are the next ones to fall? The non-Jews. Anywhere in history where you've seen Jews being persecuted, you'll see that the next victims were also non-Jews who thought differently from the regime. So what can we conclude from that?
Why do you think, Yakov, that there is so much hatred in general throughout history? We already saw it in the war with the Jews, with Hitler. Why do you think there is so much hatred, fear? I don't know how to define it. Towards Jews. What is it about Jews that makes people, I'm talking about other people. Obviously, I love everyone and you already know how I am. Those of you who have been following me on the channel and on social media for a while. Why so much fear and so much hatred towards Zionism or Jews? What is so bad about you? Because I know you, I met you recently, but you seem like a completely normal person to me. I've known Jews for many years here in Spain, and they are wonderful people. I don't know 200 Jews, but I know 3 or 4, and they're all wonderful, right? Why is there that hatred towards you? I mean, worldwide?
And I would like, for those who read a little about literature, Shakespeare, he had a play called The Merchant of Odessa. And in the play, The Merchant of Odessa, one of the characters is Shiloh the Jew. And how was Shiloh portrayed for those who have studied Shakespeare's works? Like that, with a big nose, nails, and feet. On stage, the audience threw tomatoes at him and yelled, Jew. Did you know that when The Merchant of Odessa was written, England hadn't had Jews for 300 years? That means the people who threw tomatoes at Shiloh and even their ancestors had never seen a Jew since there were no Jews in England then. But why that stigma? Well, Shiloh in that play has a dialogue and says, and it's exactly what you just said. Just like that, he says, don't we get sick just like Christians get sick? If they prick us, don't we also bleed? If we die, just like they do? I mean, sometimes we are human beings, but what is so frightening about that? It's a well-studied topic that many have discussed with various theories. The one I like is that Jews represent an idea that is often very challenging to authority. The Jewish people are a nation, the people of Israel, born from a slave revolution against a regime, and that's how we came to freedom. It's the Exodus story, the foundational event of leaving Egypt that has always driven the Jewish people. For example, when the Greeks came and conquered Israel, the Maccabees, the Jews, rose up to fight against the Greeks to liberate Israel. Because we do not allow this idea of totalitarianism, if Rome came, the Jews tried to fight against Rome. Even if it was the greatest empire, freedom is worth more than anything. Because the exodus from Egypt is like the heart of how our nation was born. Throughout history, the Jew has created ideas that challenge. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus invented the idea of challenging the temple. And that's why, when I mention Jesus, I understand that it's a challenging and revolutionary idea. Karl Marx creates the idea that there is a social injustice. There is the capitalist, the proletariat, and there has to be a struggle. I don't support communism and believe Marxism has harmed the world, but I see it as a challenging idea. Throughout history, the Jew has represented challenging ideas, including Zionism. Zionism challenges colonialism and asserts that we will liberate our land. If they invaded us here, Islam invaded here, the British invaded here, all these empires, and we, the people who are originally from here, liberated it. This idea challenges empires and troubles those who support totalitarianism. So I think that's why many people don't like the idea of Jews having a concept of freedom.
It's an idea that, for some strange reason, aligns a lot with my philosophy of life. I really like freedom, mutual respect, that everyone can do and undo whatever they want freely as long as they don't harm others. And above all, the respect that you can often see Israel does have, but which gets manipulated, especially in Spain. In Spain, it's just exaggerated. It's manipulated and twisted to the point that a lot of people, incredibly narrow-minded, just stick with the headline, it's genocidal. And what does this end up leading to? The other day, I was watching a first division soccer match here, and I don't remember which minute it was. They threw tennis balls, Palestinian flags appeared, and the match was stopped. For what reason? In fact, there's a rule in the Football Federation that if it happens again, the match will be suspended. Of course, that causes a lot of financial problems and so on. Well, it surprisingly only happened once, but it was already all over the media. What does Spain gain? For example, here, supporting Palestine with people like Barbie Gaza, the Flotilla, Ada Colau, and the one you mentioned who compared it to Guantanamo and Auschwitz, they really criticized him. Here in Spain, there were people who think like me who really gave it to him, verbally speaking.
How can you compare yourself when you've only been there 4 days?
So are there people who actually believe that? And in Spain, people are deeply divided and argue over issues like Israel and Palestine, even though we have our own problems here. All the problems you can imagine and more.